During his high school years, Ryusuke was a handsome, dashing, young, wealthy boy. He seemed to have everything going for him. He had lots of friends, and while not the most studious person in the class, he did seem to get his work done somehow, probably from the help of his friends or girlfriends. For you see, Ryusuke was a playboy. In fact, that's what he prided himself the most. His friends gave him a nickname, Ryusuke, instead of calling him Ryusuke. What was amazing about him, he could practically charm anyone, any female, and including his male friends, if he really wanted to, though girls were the ones he only targeted. Even though many of the girls at his school caught on to his mischievous ways, they just couldn't resist. Many girls hoped to be the one that he would stay with, the one that he liked, the one he would someday marry, because he was handsome, intelligent, and came from a wealthy family. However, most dates lasted only until he got the girl in bed. Once he did that, it was on to the next one. He would even challenge himself to date girls who were not into dating, who were not that attractive. It didn't matter to him. To him, he was keeping a scorecard, because he knew in Japanese society that someday he would have to get married to fit his family's image. So he thought to himself, well, why not have fun while I'm young? Now, of course, his actions got him into trouble many times. But his parents, being well-known and wealthy, always found a way to bail him out. This only encouraged his destructive behavior further. It got to the point where even his friends were saying, hey, dude, can't you chill a little bit? Save some for us? But of course, Ryusuke barely heeded their words. One day, however, he noticed a very shy, attractive, young girl new to the school in Tokyo. She was pretty, but very pale and very weak-looking. She always kept to herself and barely talked to anyone else. Ryusuke obviously thought this was another challenge to take. More points for his scorecard. But try as he might, the new girl resisted every single advance Ryusuke had tried. She would just simply say, "I'm sorry, but I'm busy," and walk away from him. This infuriated Ryusuke. Ryusuke never loses. Ryusuke was never turned down by anyone. Even his friends told him, hey, knock it off, let this one go. But he couldn't. His pride and his ego was at stake. So he tried another approach. He tried to talk to her on an intellectual level, find out what her hobbies were, see if he could seduce her another way. So one day, he found her after school sitting on a park bench reading a book. The park bench was situated right in front of a small water fountain. Ryusuke calmly sat down next to her and very softly and very gently asked her what she was reading. She said it was a book on biology, and she quickly looked back down into the book and continued to read. Ryusuke apologized for his rather silly advances and asked her very politely what her hobbies were. She slowly looked up at him, met his eyes, and quietly said, in a somewhat seductive way, "I like to take showers." Ryusuke thought he was finally getting through to her, and he looked at her and said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yes, especially in hot weather." Ryusuke started to get excited, and he asked, "Do you take showers alone?" And she says, "Usually, but not always." Ryusuke was getting really hot now. But he knew this girl was very intelligent, and he'd blow it if he said the wrong thing. So he very calmly, and very quietly, and very gently asked her, "Oh, would you mind going on a date with me someday?" And the new girl looked up from her book again, and quietly smiled at him, and said, "Yes, maybe someday." Ryusuke didn't even know what her name was, so he asked, "By the way, what's your name?" "Oh, me? My name is Karin." And before Ryusuke could introduce himself, she said, "I know who you are. your name is Ryusuke, and you like girls." And at that moment, Yusuke's manhood dropped. And with a nervous laugh, he says, "Yeah, I guess I do. But you seem different. I'd like to get to know you more if I could." Yusuke went on. She just looked at him and gave him that empty smile. And she said, "Sure, why not?" And Yusuke started to get excited again. And he looked at her and said, "Can we meet next week? On Saturday, after school?" And she said, "Sure." And before Yusuke could say another word, she put her face back into her book and said, "We'll meet here at 1 o'clock. Yusuke, only dumbfounded, said, Okay." And Yusuke noticed the book that she was reading. It wasn't just biology. It was about the human anatomy. He thought it was a bit odd. But then, everything was odd about this girl. But he stood up, looked at her, and said, "Okay, see you on Saturday here at the park." And he left. Then, Ryusuke started to plan out his date. He thought of the local amusement park, an ice cream parlor, and of course, a love hotel. For those who do not know, love hotels are very popular in Japan for many reasons. Japan is a very densely populated country with few places to make love. So love hotels became a popular thing back in the Showa era, around the 1950s and 60s. Most of the people who used them were businessmen with their love affairs, cheating on their wives, and sometimes vice versa. College students, parents to get away from the kids for a night. Rarely did high school kids use them because they couldn't afford them. But Yusuke was a wealthy boy, and he often used these hotels for his liaison. Since his new girlfriend liked showers, he thought he would find a love hotel with a fancy bath in it. The following day at school, Ryusuke ran to Karin and started to talk about their date. He was very nervous for the first time talking to a girl. She looked at him very coldly and said, "Yeah, I'll meet you on the day." To everyone's surprise, especially the girls within the room, they couldn't believe it. Why is Ryusuke wanting to date this girl? They were all jealous, but utterly miffed. Even for Ryusuke, this was a little bit unusual. Nonetheless, Ryusuke, on the following Saturday, after school, took Karin to an amusement park, an ice cream parlor, a walk in the park, and so on. During the whole time, she was cold and mostly unresponsive. He could barely talk about anything, but being Yusuke for what he is, asked her if he'd like to go to a place he rented out for the evening. And she looked up at him with a blank expression and said, "Yeah, okay." Yusuke couldn't understand it. This girl was acting strange in every way he could think of. He was beginning to have doubts about whether he should actually take her to the love hotel or not. But since he set everything up, he decided to go through it. Now, like most love hotels, this one also had a secret door that allowed people to enter discreetly. Much to his surprise, when he got to the door, Karin opened it up, like she knew the place. And he looked at her and said, "Have you been here before?" And she said, "No, I just figured it out." Ryusuke was beginning to have even more doubts. But they were here, so he led her up to the room and sat her down on a couch. Now at first he was very kind and polite because he didn't know how to handle her. But then he started to make his moves and she looked at him and said, "Can I take a shower first?" And Yusuke was dumbfounded. And he said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And she got up and went into the very fancy bathroom he had chosen specifically for this date. Yusuke's heart was pounding. He didn't know if he liked her. He didn't know what to do. He was getting excited that she wanted to take a shower. She was so weak and pale on his date, so cold, and now she wants to take a shower. All kinds of thoughts were racing through his head, when suddenly she called from the bathroom, "I'm ready. Why don't you come on in?" Ryusuke thought, "What? What is this girl?" So he got up from the couch, walked over towards the bathroom, opened the door, and he saw her. She was beaming. She was glowing. She wasn't pale anymore. She was beautiful, but when he got closer, he saw her for what she really was. Her eyes were like reptilian. Her skin was a pale green-gray, that now that she was in the water, looked slimy, as though she just secreted something from the pores of her skin. She was staring at him with a wide ear-to-ear grin. He felt nauseous just at the sight of her. He could hear thoughts that were not his in his head, telling him to come into the water. His instincts told him to get out fast, but he couldn't move. He felt the life force of his very soul being drained. He started to feel weak. She grabbed his wrist to pull him in. Her grip so tight it felt like 20 men crushing the bone of his wrist. He tried to scream. He tried to move, but he couldn't. And then she pulled him in. He started to kick and thrash with all his might, and she muffled his scream. A couple who were in the next room heard all the calamity. The man said to his lover, "Boy, these kids these days, they're really into some weird stuff, aren't they?" And then all went silent. The following Monday, when school began, Karin and Ryusuke were both absent. Ryusuke's parents had thought he went on another one of his adventures until they found out that he didn't show up for school. They contacted the police, and the police looked everywhere for him and Karin, but they couldn't find him. It was like one of those missing person cases where people just suddenly vanish without explanation or warning, or any kind of trace left behind. The police then went to Karin's parents. The questioning went on for hours, but the only thing the police could find out was that Karin had been acting weird the past 5 or 6 years, ever since she had some accident when she was younger. Apparently, when Karin was around 11 years old, possibly 12, she went out alone in a marsh in the middle of the night. Her parents had thought she was sleepwalking. When they discovered her futon empty, they panicked and called the police at that time, and they all searched the surrounding area, and they found footprints leading up to the marsh that matched Karin's. By chance, they found Karin facing down in the water. They thought she was dead, but when they pulled her up, she was still alive. So they quickly revived her. She seemed okay. However, the parents noted it was from that point onward that she started acting strange. They felt that maybe she got brain damaged. But the doctors insisted she was fine. From that point forward, she no longer played with friends, but often took a lot of showers and studied very hard. She was very intelligent. Some would say beyond most children at her age. Her parents remarked that she seemed to know everything, including what people were thinking. They never told anyone this because they just wanted to have a normal child, and felt that bringing these issues up would make her life miserable. But now the parents believe that it may have something to do with Yusuke's disappearance. The police asked her where their hometown was, and the parents of Karin answered, Kyushu, the southern part of Japan. It was in a small town, very few people, hot and muggy, next to a swamp. And the police asked, do you think she went back there? And the parents were just about to say no when they gave it a second thought, and then they realized maybe she did go back there. She always complained about Tokyo, having not enough nature, not enough water. She hated being here. So the police contacted the local town in Kyushu, and that they would send someone down soon. Weeks went by, but near the swamp, they found a book on human anatomy they believed belonged to Karin. They also found Ryusuke's clothing folded neatly in a pile on the shore of the marsh, but nothing else. No bodies, no written notes, no camera footage, and since love hotels are very discreet, no one saw them go in or go out. The only places they were seen were at the ice cream parlor and the amusement park. No one came forward to claim that they had seen them anywhere else. Both Ryusuke and Karin's parents mourned. For years, they tried to figure out what had happened. Karin's father often went back to Kyushu to visit the place they used to live. He went to the local shrine to pray for help, and one day, a Shinto priest found Karin's father crying while trying to pray. The priest looked at him and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And the father looked back and explained what had happened. The priest listened to the father's story very carefully. When he finished, he said, "I'll prepare some religious items and a prayer for your loss." He instructed the father to take the items and say the prayer at the last known place of Karin's whereabouts. The Shinto priest offered to do the ceremony himself, but the father said, "No, this would be enough. I'll do the prayer. Thank you very much. Maybe if I do this myself, I can move on from it." So the following day, Karin's father, along with his wife, went down to the shore of the swamp where they found the book and Ryusuke's clothes. As he began the prayer, his wife started to lay flowers and sprinkle the pure water around the area. Within a few minutes, they both finished. They both clapped their hands, bowed to the water, turned around, and left. Both sat in the car for a moment before the father began to drive. The wife looked up at the father with tears in her eyes, and she looked at him and said, "I thought I could hear her. I thought I could feel her. It's like she was saying, 'Let us go. You don't need to come here anymore. We're fine.'" And at first the father was going to quip, "What nonsense." But he looked at his wife and said, "To be honest, I heard it too. Perhaps we should just let her go." And with that, they drove off. The two teens were never heard from again. There was much speculation what happened to the two teens, but only Karin's parents knew the truth. But for obvious reasons, they kept it quiet.